Hey Optimancers, Chris here. In my last video I discussed why the invisible condition is superior to simply not being seen by other methods. Video is linked up above and in the video description, so if you missed that one, maybe check it out before watching this video, as I will be referring to that information in this video under the assumption that you already know about it. Instead, what I want to do is show how we can use that information to make an effective build. The advantages of invisible, if we can maintain it for an entire combat, they're just significant. But I do want to address there are some challenges to making this build. First, and most obvious, is simply that greater invisibility is a 4th level spell. That means before level 7, we have to be able to do other things to be an effective character. Other methods of invisibility either come on even later, or they break when we do things like attack, which is a big part of the reason we wanted invisibility in the first place. Secondly, in order to not give up our first action of a combat, casting a spell, we need the Quicken Spell Metamagic. This requires either 3 levels in Sorcerer, or the Metamagic Adept feat. However, the Metamagic Adept feat doesn't really work for us, because although it gives us 2 sorcery points, what it doesn't give you is the Sorcerer's Font of Magic feature. This feature allows you to convert sorcery points into spell slots, or, and the far more important thing, in regards to this build at least, is convert spell slots into sorcery points. That means taking the feat alone limits you to doing a quicken spell greater invisibility to once per long rest. That's just not nearly enough. I mean, if your group tends to do one combat and then long rest right again afterwards, then Metamagic Adept works for you, but for the rest of us that are going to have 2 or more combats per long rest, we need either Font of Magic or a lot more sorcery points. One option to address this is to focus on levels of Sorcerer. With 7 levels of Sorcerer, we could get greater invisibility, and we would have enough sorcery points to quicken a few times even without needing to use Font of Magic. This, however, leaves the question, exactly what are we going to do offensively once we're concentrating on improved invisibility? Advantage on Firebolts isn't going to lead to an overly effective contribution. No subclass of Sorcerer gets extra attack. We could do a couple levels of Warlock, and then I guess just do a Sorelock, and then you get advantage with Eldritch Blast. And that will lead to okay damage, definitely over the baseline, but not a dramatic amount over. And I don't need to do the math on that, since my baseline is based on Eldritch Blast without advantage, but Hex added in. That assumes a 60% chance to hit without advantage, and if we remove the Hex, I mean, it doesn't matter. We could increase the chance to hit to 100%. We're still not hitting those big damage numbers. What I've determined is the best damage I could get is with the greater invisibility build that I am going to be presenting right now. At least eventually. Like I said, there's a fair number of levels before we can even access the spell. And even once we do, we still need to have weapon attacks powerful enough that advantage takes us into the stratosphere. The key is we need to get extra attack while still advancing our spell progression, as well as accessing greater invisibility, and then we need the sorcery points and Font of Magic, that's going to require 3 levels of Sorcerer, all while having the ability to generate enough sorcery points to last an entire adventuring day. So I'm going to have to go through the build that in my calculations achieves this with the best results without being ineffective before we reach the levels where this strategy starts to pay off with those big damage numbers. I'm assuming Customize Your Origin, which allows you to move racial ability score bonuses being used, and if it's not used at your table, well then I have to assume it'll be a temporary thing for you, because all new releases have this built in now. I'm also assuming optional class features are okay, but neither of these are required. You can make this build work without either. If you don't have Customize Your Origin, any elf from any recent publication, like the Eladrin or the Shadowkai, they work fine. And other than some non-primary spells, the optional class features, they're not necessary either. So we're going to move through the initial levels quickly, and then we're going to focus on when this character becomes a damage machine as we pull our elves together. Okay, so first our race. I'm using the High Elf from the Player's Handbook. For this build, I've switched the +1 intelligence to charisma, and I've kept the +2 in dexterity. We get a 60-foot dark vision, keen senses, which gives us the perception skill, Fey Ancestry for charm resistance, and for sleep immunity. Trance gives us 4-hour long rests. Elf weapon training gives us the weapons we need. I mean, feel free to switch longsword if you like, but keep longbow. And then I picked the Booming Blade cantrip. Our starting ability scores using point buy are an 8 strength, 17 dexterity, 15 Constitution, 8 Intelligence, 8 Wisdom, and 16 Charisma. Pick the background that gives you whatever skills you prefer. I preferred Criminal. I figure it works well for Deception and Stealth. I really think you should get proficiency in Stealth by one means or another with this build, but you don't need to get it through your background, because we're going to start with 8 straight levels in Bard with the College of Swords subclass. Like I said, we're going to go through this part quickly. I've taken Acrobatics, Athletics, and Performance as starting skill proficiencies, but if you didn't pick up Stealth through your background, grab it here. Jack of all Trades is going to give us half proficiency in any ability check where we're not already adding proficiency. This is a lovely feature, and it applies to initiative. And when you're counting on your first turn to apply the invisible condition, winning initiative is maybe not vital, but it is handy. Song of Rest gives a small bonus to healing that is done through short rests. Expertise will give us double proficiency in a couple of skills, and make one of those choices Stealth. The other, take your pick. I took Perception. College of Swords gives us either 2-weapon fighting or dueling, and dueling is the one we want. Now, this is not primarily a melee build, but grab a rapier anyways. We'll have a decent stab, though hanging out in dangerous melee, it's just not where we want to be. But going in and stabbing that prone enemy to finish it off, that's perfectly reasonable. Blade Flourish improves our walking speed by 10 whenever we take the attack action. In addition, it also allows us to use Bardic Inspiration to enhance our attacks. Defensive Flourish, this is the one we're going to be using most of the time. It adds our Bardic Inspiration die to both the damage of our attack as well as to our armor class. The important thing to note here is that this applies to weapon attacks, so both melee and ranged weapons can be enhanced with Blade Flourish. And secondly, it's attached to the attack action. So if we're using a cantrip like Booming Blade instead of taking the attack action, then we can't use Blade Flourish with that attack. Technically, if we were a Blade Singer, we could, but the ability scores of a Blade Singer would be an absolute disaster with this build. So we should talk about Inspiration. With a 16 Charisma, we're going to have 3 points, and at level 5, they go from a d6 to a d8, and we'll recover them after any short rest. We can also hand them out as regular Inspiration, which isn't a bad way to go either. Use your best judgment. Our ability score increase at 4th level must be Elven Accuracy. This is absolutely required. We increase our Dexterity to 18, and we get those 3d20 advantage rolls. Now at level 4, we're still going to get advantage sometimes, but really this is an investment because eventually we'll have advantage all the time, or at least darn close to it. At 6th level, we get Counter Charm, and that's enough said about that. If you're unfamiliar with Counter Charm, keep it that way. It'll avoid you disappointment. We also get extra attack at level 6, which is a huge advantage to any weapon user. Don't worry, I'll be including damage calculations, but we're going to come back to that after covering some other features and spells. At level 8, we'll grab the Sharpshooter feat. This gives us a ludicrous range without penalty, ignoring cover, and the -5 to hit for the +10 damage per attack, which goes so very, very nicely whenever we have advantage, and even more nicely with advantage plus Elven Accuracy. At level 8, we'll have 3 Bard cantrips and 11 Bard spells known. Here's how that will go. First, with our cantrips, you can largely take what you like. I like Minor Illusion for those lower levels, Mage Hand is good utility, and I figure Message could be a way to communicate in secret while you're invisible. At level 1, you're going to take the Sleep spell, and that becomes your thing. Shoot a longbow or stab with a rapier, and when you want to pull out the big guns, cast Sleep. That is both your level 1 and your level 2 character, and it's quite effective. 5d8 hit points of creatures are affected. That's about 22 or 23 hit points on average. That's 3 goblins that fall unconscious with no saving throw. Though I have noticed in some more recent 1-level encounters that I've seen, some monsters have so many hit points, a sleep spell won't have any chance to drop them, so use your judgment. Against groups of enemies, you're probably going to get better value. Other first level spells to pick up, though we're probably not casting them as much at levels 1 or 2, is Healing Word, Longstrider, Command, and Tasha's Hideous Laughter. At level 3, we'll switch out the Sleep spell for the Aid spell, and we grab Shatter. And at level 4, we grab Mirror Image. So let's talk about tactics at level 3 and 4. Tasha's Hideous Laughter is strong against a single opponent. Basically, they make a Wisdom save or become incapacitated and fall prone. and Shatter gives you a pretty good area of effect damage spell. It's a 10-foot radius, does 3d8 thunder damage with a Constitution saving throw for half, doesn't hold up to higher level area of effect blast spells, but at these levels, levels 3 and 4, it's pretty effective. When you aren't casting, shoot your longbow or stab with the rapier. The rapier does a bit more thanks to dueling, and we can apply Booming Blade. But I wouldn't be going into melee most of the time regardless, because our armor class is so-so, and our hit points aren't that great either. But you know what? If an enemy is grappled and prone or something, then yeah, I would go in and do a stabby-stabby. Also, sometimes that enemy comes to you, and it's handy to have an option for when that happens. But we have enough spell slots at this point, we can spend more of our actions casting spells. And since Shatter and Hideous Laughter use different spell slot levels, they shouldn't be competing with each other. These two spells, that's how I would spend most of my spell slots at these levels. Moving on to level 5 is when we switch out Shatter for Hypnotic Pattern, which is just a way better area of effect option. It's bigger, it's longer range, and creatures that fail their saving throw are out of the fight until we choose to deal with them. We also pick up Dispel Magic at level 5. Second level slots now go to either casting Aid or Mirror Image, and for upcasting the command spell. This spell has a target make a wisdom save, and if they fail, they follow your command, and then they end their turn. So basically we're stealing one round from that creature. Command has 2 additional features that work well with this build. First, it doesn't use concentration, which means it doesn't compete with greater invisibility. And secondly, the upcasting is really good. For each additional spell level, we target an additional creature. I consider it a very good second level spell slot casting. At level 6, we grab either Lehman's Tiny Hut if nobody else already has it, or Plant Growth if they do. Plant Growth requires the right terrain, but when we have the terrain, it's super useful. Like with Command, it also doesn't use concentration, so we can cast it when we're concentrating on greater invisibility. So at levels 5 and 6, we have a lot of spells that are useful, and I would be using them. But we're still going to have times when we aren't casting leveled spells, and in those cases, a Booming Blade Rapier attack at level 5 is decent, or an extra attack Rapier or Longbow attack are okay backup actions at level 6, but we're still not getting into great damage numbers. Here's the math. So at level 6, with our Longbow, we're looking at 11.17 DPR. That is significantly below the baseline of 16.5. And Rapier isn't that much better. It's 13.94. That's closer, but we're still not quite to baseline. So how do we handle that? Well, we're a primary caster, so we concentrate at this point in spell casting. These are backup actions for us, even once we get extra attack. That will change, eventually dramatically, but this needs to be a character that resigns to being a spellcaster who can do a bit of damage, and the rest of the time is doing spells while we build up our offensive options. At level 7, we're grabbing Polymorph, which is a really good spell at that level, becomes our biggest powerhouse spell. This isn't something we cast after becoming invisible, but at level 7 it's something we do instead of becoming invisible, because as of yet we haven't picked up our offense to the point where it's outpowering a Polymorph spell. At level 8 we'll grab Greater Invisibility, but for now we're not going to be focusing on it. But at least we have it on hand for when we are. Just a reminder, we want Greater Invisibility because it's got 3 things going for it. First, it lasts a minute. Second, it won't get broken by our attacks. And third, we can quicken it. Not yet, but that's coming. Not much changes with our strategy at levels 7 and 8, except that our spellcasting has become more plentiful and more powerful. So even more big spells, and even less weapon attacks. Remember, at this point, we're just a straight primary caster. So it shouldn't be surprising that spellcasting is the best thing we can do at this point. Our attacks just aren't that great, at least yet. There is one change, though, at level 8. If we have advantage, then we want to shoot our longbow. Here's the math on that. So if we have advantage, we actually have a 66% chance to hit, and that's the key. Normally, applying the -5 from Sharpshooter, we'd expect this level to have a 30% chance to hit, and that's terrible. However, advantage brings us up to 51%, and then Elven Accuracy brings that up to 66%. The -5 to hit, plus 10 damage from Sharpshooter, plus extra attack, plus Elven Accuracy advantage, it's good damage. We're not relying on invisibility for advantage yet, but advantage still happens sometimes for any character that makes attacks. The enemy is restrained or stunned, or we happen to be hiding. And if we don't have advantage, we cast spells. All things considered, that's almost 26 damage, and over 26 if we're remembering to use our Bardic Inspiration on Blade Flourishes. Generally, I would recommend the Defensive Flourish for that big armor class boost that lasts a whole round. And at level 8, the baseline is just 17.7, so that is a 50% increase over baseline. That's a really strong attack. If we don't have advantage, it's not nearly this pretty. So that's when you cast a spell. Our goal, though, is to get to the point where we always have advantage, but we're not there yet. So that brings us to our breakpoint in Bard, and we'll grab that 3 levels in Sorcerer that we need for a quick and greater invisibility. I picked up the Divine Soul Sorcerer subclass. Largely, it's about getting favored by the gods, which gives us a big saving throw boost once per short rest. 2d4 is applied after the roll is made, and it will often turn a failed saving throw into a successful one. If another Sorcerer subclass really fits your concept for your character, then go ahead. What we're really after is built into the main class, not the subclass. For metamagic, obviously Quicken Spell. I like Subtle Spell as our second pick, because we're going to be able to make some good use of this later on. Presumably, if we're both invisible and hidden, a spell with no verbal component shouldn't give away our position. So we get 3 sorcery points, that's 1 Quicken Spell, but Font of Magic lets us convert spell slots into sorcery points. 2 spell levels per additional Quicken Spell. We've also invested all 11 levels into primary caster levels, so we have the maximum spell slot progression for this character at this point. We could cast up to 6 greater invisibility spells if we use 5th and 6th level slots for it as well, and we could theoretically quicken all of them. That would require a total of 12 sorcery points, and we have 3 already, so we would have to sacrifice 9 spell slot levels. Lots of ways we could do that, like giving up our 2nd level slots and a single 3rd level slot, for example. That should cover you for all but the longest adventuring days, so that's practically permanent advantage. Though if you want to use those 5th and 6th level spell slots for big upcasts, that's not a bad way to go, especially at this level. Our greater invisibility damage here is pretty good, but what you'll see is it's about to take off in the next few levels. That's when we want to shoot all the time. At level 11, I want to use greater invisibility, but it's not necessarily all I'm going to do. So here's the math for greater invisibility attacks at 11th level, which should look a lot like level 8 if we had advantage some other way. Here though, we can expect advantage, and that is a big deal. But the other thing here is that 11th level baseline damage has jumped, so this is pretty much matching baseline damage. There's nothing wrong with doing baseline damage, especially when we combine some other spellcasting tricks and the inherent defensive boost from being invisible. But watch how this damage is going to explode from here. First though, let's talk spell picks for those 3 sorcerer levels. Our 4 cantrips should at least include guidance. I think that's an obvious pick. The other picks, take what you like. I took Spare the Dying, Control Flames, and Light. We grab Shield and Absorb Elements right away. Even using Font of Magic to convert spell slots into sorcery points, we should still be able to keep our 1st level spell slots. And these are terrific defensive boosts, and neither interfere with our greater invisibility. When we get to 2nd level in Sorcerer, pick what spell you like, because we're going to be switching it out for a 2nd level spell once we get to level 3, which allows us to get both Misty Step and Web. Misty Step will be our teleport option. Now, if you did go Eladrin or Shadowkai, then maybe you don't need this. But if we wanted Booming Blade for those lower levels, then we should grab Misty Step here. Web is a strong control option, but we can't combine it with greater invisibility. But you know what? Sometimes it's better than being invisible. And whether we get advantage from invisibility or from enemies being restrained, it's still advantage. At level 12, we're going to take 1 more level in Sorcerer. First off, that 4th sorcery point is great to have. Now we have 2 quickens before Font of Magic. And I would probably grab Blindness, Deafness at this point. It's a non-concentration spell, and it is a strong upcasting option. It's definitely an alternative to upcast and command. Command has a language requirement that Blindness Deafness doesn't have. Like command, Blindness Deafness adds an additional target per spell slot level and doesn't use our concentration, so we can do it while we're invisible. Most importantly though, we grab Crossbow Expert with our ability score increase. It is time to switch to a hand crossbow. Now, you can still use the longbow when you need the massive range, but hand crossbow is going to increase our damage a lot. Now, if you really want to play around and game the system, you could fire your longbow on round 1 when you're using your bonus action to cast Greater Invisibility, and then stow it at the end of your turn and draw your hand crossbow on round 2 when your bonus actions are available. For my damage calculations, I just assumed we're using the hand crossbow all the time. Basically, we're going to end up with a 28% increase over our baseline of 26.55, but there is a bit more to unpack on the math I've presented here. The assumption I'm making is that we're bonus action casting Greater Invisibility on round 1, and then I'm assuming a 4-round on average combat. We're firing our hand crossbow as a bonus action on rounds 2 through 4. That is a 28% lift in damage in one level. The damage goes up for longer combats and down for shorter ones. This is probably to our advantage because the toughest combats tend to be the long ones. So now we're doing pretty good damage all the time, so we can focus less on spells, except Greater Invisibility of course, and more on skewering our enemies to death. So this is the perfect time to multiclass again. This time we're going to multiclass into Fighter. Single level of Fighter does wonders. We get that tiny healing boost through Second Wind, but mainly it's about picking up the archery combat style. So our 66% chance to hit with that +2 from archery combat style becomes an 88% chance. That adds over 10 DPR, so now we're 69% over the baseline. That's really good damage. Often, when we get into that kind of damage, we're really not focusing on defense at all. But with this build, the invisible condition is paying off both offensively and defensively. And here at level 13, I think we hit a crossroads. With this build, I'm continuing with Fighter, but there is another option worth considering. If you want to focus on even more defense, consider 2 levels of Rogue. That would allow you to use Cutting Action to hide as a bonus action. And if you watch my last video, basically, it's battleship time. However, I am going to focus a bit more on offense, so we're going to carry on Fighter to level 4. It really does add a significant amount. Action Surge will give us a big damage boost on 1 round per short rest. This is normally something I would do on round 1 of that big fight, so quicken Greater Invisibility, then attack twice, then Action Surge for 2 more attacks. We're going to grab the Battlemaster subclass because that's the subclass that tends to operate best with sharpshooter builds. We get 4 superiority dice, which come back on short rests. And obviously we will grab Precision Attack, then 2 other maneuvers of your choice. I figure a quick toss can work well with a sharpshooter in nets, which is yet another way to secure advantage, and Goading Attack can be fun on an opponent that's stuck with melee attacks and has no way to get to you on the next round. Mainly though, I'm assuming what we'll be doing is missing 12% of the time. When we do, because we have Elven Accuracy advantage, we still likely don't auto-miss, because a 1 on all 3 dice, you know how often it'll happen? About 0.01% of the time. In other words, 1 of every 8,000 attacks. So if we attack 2 times on round 1 and 3 times on round 2 through 4, let's say we have 4 combats between short rests, we should have about 5 attacks that miss total, and none of them should be auto misses. Let's say with Precision Attack we can turn 3 of those into hits. Then that's an additional 3 hits per short rest. I'll show you how that increases the damage in a bit. At level 4, we'll grab Resilient Constitution, protecting our concentration, giving us proficiency in 2 of the 3 common saving throws, and improving our hit points. If you don't care about your defense, then raising your dexterity here does give you even more damage. And let's look at that damage. So, we went from meeting baseline at 11 to 28% over at 12 to 69% over at 13, and now we are 88% over at 16. If you want over double the baseline, then you take that 4th level fighter ability score increase, and instead of taking resilient, you take the +2 dexterity, and that will get you there. You'll be over double the baseline. But personally, I just don't think it's worth giving up resilient constitution, at least in my opinion. Remember, that's also your concentration saving throws. Here, not just are we doing good damage, all attacks against us have disadvantage, and we have shield when we need it, and that might even be combined with defensive flourish bonuses. Let's say we have non-magic, studded leather, and nothing else. That's a base 16, 21 with shield, 25-ish with defensive flourish, and disadvantage to be hit. That's with no magic items. We just shouldn't be getting hit very often at all. And a lot of spells and effects won't be able to target an invisible enemy. We're also not really an attractive target. Finally, if we get stuck in melee, we should be able to back away without any problems, in most cases not even provoking an opportunity attack. Now, we are not going to get any disadvantage from being in melee because of Crossbow Expert. It doesn't mean you want to hang out there. This is the apex of our offensive power, level 16. Even if we don't increase our damage at all, right to 20th level, we're still comfortably over the baseline all those levels. And unlike builds that gain advantage from other means like Darkness and Devil's Sight, this is reliable advantage, even if that enemy has Drew Sight or Blind Sight, which we discovered about 1/4 do. Which is why I'm wrapping up the build here. This is a build that is truly focused on getting the most out of the invisible condition. But I will give you some options if you carry this past level 16. The 2 levels of Rogue option still applies. Cunning Action, Hide, and remember we have high dexterity and expertise in stealth, and the enemy is playing Battleship. Just keep in mind that Cunning Action does require using our bonus action for that. I think the other attractive option is we go back to Bard. We can increase the die type on our Blade Flourishes to 10, we can get Magical Secrets at 10th level in Bard, so maybe a Find Greater Steed, and we would share the greater invisibility with it, as well as whatever your favorite 5th level spell is. This will also give us some 6th level spells, and another feat or ability score increase. And that's pull our elf together. We start primarily as a bow/rapier user supplemented with spells, then to an invisible bow user, finishing up as an invisible hand crossbow user. We're a straight class primary caster right until level 8, so our spells will be competitive with anyone in the group. Then with multiclassing, we're getting decent damage at level 11, good damage at level 13, and great damage by level 16. Are there any changes you would make to this? Is there a better way to take advantage of greater invisibility? Let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.